All right, guys, this is Mark Horn and Andrew Isker here. Hi, Andrew.
Hey Mark, how you doing?
All right, and I plan to post this as kind of my first vlog slash podcast that I've done for the website SolomonSays.net. I haven't figured out the different formats yet, but I've figured that out. If you see it, I must have figured that out. So that'll all happen in my future. It's already happened when you're watching this, except for you, Andrew. You're watching it right now. So anyway. And I wanted to talk to Andrew. What happened is I was on a trip, and I would have never done this on purpose, but my wife was looking for a book that we could listen to through her Hoopla app, which like gets her into our library account and lets her download audiobooks temporarily. And so one she had access to was, well, she had access to several Chronicles of Narnia. My favorite was, according to what I remembered, was The Horse and His Boy. Now, I've read this several times. I knew I liked the story. I could have told you the story. And yet, somehow, I haven't looked at it since I started working on the book that's now been published, Solomon Says. And I kind of felt like, oh my goodness, this is the perfect children's story for my book. In fact, maybe it's the reason why I wrote my book the way I did and didn't realize it. I'm sure there's many books I owe that debt to, but it just struck me so powerfully. Is ironic because I don't think I quote Lewis's essay. I don't think I quote much or any of his fiction in the book. That Solomon Says. I quote Tolkien. And so I got questions about Tolkien today on another podcast. You know him, Aaron Ventura. Did you know him
Okay,
in
yeah,
Moscow? Yeah. He interviewed
yeah.
me. He and Jacob, and I had a lot of fun with that. I don't hope it is going to be intelligible to other people, but I had a lot of fun talking to him. But he asked me about Tolkien. Of course, I immediately had to talk a bunch about The Horse and His Boy because it was amazing. And the main thing, and I've already mentioned to you off camera, Andrew, is that I argue, and Solomon Says, and I argue that Proverbs treats growing up as a transition from slavery to freedom and really to rule, to kingship. Even though not everyone can be a king literally or politically or whatever you want to call it, we all are supposed to take over responsibilities and take dominion of our lives and believe that that is God's appointment to us, and that we might move on from where we are, but we need to deal with what we have and deal with it well and grow up in that context. And so this story, and I should say, if you hate spoilers and have never read this story before, I plan to spoil the whole thing. I don't feel bad about that because the fact is I keep enjoying it every time I read it, over and over again, knowing what happens. So I don't think it's going to like really steal the experience from you in a real way. I mean, it is a simple children's story, and actually most of the things that happen to Shasta, or as he later becomes known as Kor, in the story, you already know what's up. It's just fun to see him discover it. I mean, I don't know if this is true, but Aaron, I mean, I felt like the reader pretty much picked up right away that he was not from the area, that he was adopted or something, and then later on that he must be the kid's twin. Let's give the context for that, but that he probably is royalty. So
Yeah, so if you haven't read it or listened to it, or if you're unfamiliar with the story, yeah, turn everything off,
yeah,
5 minutes ago.
yeah, I said that. So I said that. I'm
Yeah,
not.
yeah,
But I
for
said
sure.
spoilers. But
That's right.
I mean, the point is, it is a perfect story because Shasta is growing up. It's a leaving home, it's a finding home story, and it's a story about escaping slavery and going on to become an heir to a kingdom. And this was perfect for a kind of a wisdom context. It was awesome. I mean, sorry to date myself by using the term awesome, but anyway, it was just amazingly it was a very fruitful way to describe growing up. By the way, I should say just general background. If you are not familiar with this Chronicles of Narnia, one reason I really like The Horse and His Boy better than all the others is actually because it has no transfer world kind of thing going on.
Mhm.
It's not no wardrobe, no picture,
Mhm.
nothing to go from one world to the next. It's a complete fantasy adventure with some references back to other stories, but not with a I don't know. That's kind of the hookiest part of the Narnia Chronicles is these
Yeah,
switching
I agree.
over. Yeah, I mean
Yeah, I
that's
agree with you. It's very much a standalone story.
yeah,
It's set in that universe, but
yeah.
it's its own story. I mean, the other characters in the other books are there, but they're not. They're kind of off to the side for
So
most of it.
though it's a much simpler story, it's a little bit more like Tolkien or like The Hobbit. I
Hmm.
mean,
Hmm.
except that one of Tolkien's chapters is about the size of this book. But anyway, but yeah.
Yes,
So
that's right.
I'm rereading the Fellowship of the Ring right now, and anyway, but I just thought it was a story. It was a coming of age story, leaving home story, a coming home story, growing up story, and this whole theme of he's escaping from slavery to go to
Mhm.
freedom was just amazing. And also, and I don't know how much of this Lewis thought through or how much just happens to show up in the story. Well, some things I know he thought through because he actually kind of gives you a little narration teaching it through some of it. But a lot of things struck me, and I wanted to see if you agreed with me, if you thought of anything I haven't thought of. But one thing in the book is it's obvious to me that Shasta's background as a slave is his. Now, I should say he was more raised as an abused son. He wasn't literally thinking of
Mhm.
himself as a slave up until the very night that he ran away. When he
Mhm.
discovers
Mhm.
his views of the or his suspicions that he didn't belong to his father are confirmed, and also that he's going to be sold into real slavery. He doesn't do anything, and I guess we should, just in case there's someone who really doesn't know the true breadth of the story, I'll just say it real quick. Shasta is in an imperial land of our kingdom or empire of Calormene to the south of Narnia, which is a land that is magical and has talking animals. And so the whole adventure starts with Shasta. He overhears that he's about to be sold to a rich nobleman. I won't use this Calormene title. To be sold to a nobleman, and he wonders aloud what kind of man he'll be, and he's watering this knight or this nobleman's war horse, and he happens to say, "Oh, I wish you could talk and tell me about him." And of course, the horse can talk because he has been captured from Narnia when he was a foal, has been brought up as a normal horse, which he has pretended to be because he didn't want to be used as a circus animal and guarded. He wanted to have a chance to escape, and so he and Shasta, his name was Bree in the story. The horse and the boy, that's why it's called the horse's boy. They want to escape because the horse wants a rider, so he doesn't appear to be stolen, or doesn't appear to be a runaway. Excuse me. And Shasta, and also he wants to guide Shasta to Narnia because he thinks Shasta looks Narnian, thinks he's from the north. So the point is, you got two escaped slaves, and slavery is obviously, in some sense, an advantage to Shasta. Actually, I put this note at the end because in the very end, he does become part of this royal household, and it turns
Mhm.
out he's the heir to the throne. And his brother is Corin, who's really funny, but I think Corin, I don't know if you, I actually thought he was kind of a deficient character in the sense that he's taking it all for granted. He's having fun, which is, it's fine that he has fun, but he's not a serious person
Mhm.
at any point in the story.
Mhm.
He's got a sense of honor, a sense of ethics, but it's
Mhm.
obvious that Shasta, or Kor, as he's called at the very end, that he's a deeper person.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
mean, I remember actually, I'm skipping in my notes here, but Corin like wants to get involved in the battle. They're not supposed to be fighting, and Corin is absolutely
Mhm.
certain that he's got to go fight in this battle with all these dangerous things going on. And Shasta just basically lets him to be led into it because he thinks that Corin is the one to teach him how to act and be a person in that situation. And that's obviously not true.
The opposite is true. Yeah.
Yeah. But Shasta, I mean, Corin's got a good heart, but he's not necessarily a mature person, and it doesn't sound like he ever becomes one. So I was actually thinking that one of the deliverances, the prophecy was that he would someday deliver Narnia or Archenland, that's the other kingdom, from an enemy. And it's kind of like, in some way, I think he delivered Archenland by becoming king and not having. I don't think Corin would have made a good king. That's my opinion. Anyway, I don't know if Lewis thought that. I hope so.
Well, I wonder too if it's. I mean, there's always unlike Tolkien, Lewis weaves intentionally allegory into his stories, and so I kind of wonder if Cor and Corin, their story is sort of a play on the prodigal son and his brother, where the prodigal son knows forgiveness and goes through this experience, a kind of slavery. He's willing to become a slave in his father's household, and his father accepts him back as a son, whereas his other brother never went through an experience like that and is very bitter and is shows
Corin's
himself
not
unwilling
bitter,
to.
but I didn't think of
Yeah,
that.
no,
But it's kind of a. I
there's
mean,
a
I don't know.
parallel there.
Yeah.
It's not seamless because yes, Corin is not a bad guy like the prodigal
No.
son's brother, but it seems like there's a parallel between those two brothers.
So in any case, it seems like Shasta and Cor has been benefited to some extent by his experiences. Now, that may not be realistic and everything else. I mean, there's issues that never come up because it's a children's book, but it's still, it's there. On the other hand, being a slave can also be a detriment. And that's something that Lewis says explicitly regarding Bree, because of course Bree was a slave. And he says when they're because towards the middle of the book, they're trying to outrun the enemy army and give Archenland a heads up that they're going to be attacked by kind of a strike force, trying to get a quick conquest out of Archenland. And the horses need to go fast. And it says at one point, and certainly both horses were doing, if not all they could, all they thought they could, which is not quite the same thing. And then later he says, but one of the worst results of being a slave and being forced to do things is that when there is no one to force you anymore, you find you have almost lost the power of forcing yourself. And so basically he's saying that Bree, for all the gifts he has or his abilities, he cannot really make himself go when he has to. Now, I actually think this is partly true and want to partly disagree with it. Because I'd also say that in a sense, you first get driven by someone else and then you learn to drive yourself. But I guess it just depends on your attitude and at what point this stuff happens to you. And there's variables. There's variables. I guess I would say from the standpoint of you, if you find yourself in a sense of slavery, you should say you'll be better off if you look at it as educational and training. You say, okay, I don't want to do this stuff, but there's value in learning how to make myself do things I don't want to do. So let's see if I can master that. I mean, to this level. But I mean, it was just interesting.
Well, I wonder too, though. I mean, thinking about the theme of slavery and maturity, and those two together. I mean, there is a way where you can experience that kind of slavery or even now. I mean, when you think about your book and the themes in it and the themes of Proverbs, there's a way that you can be a slave and never mature, but then be freed and still have still be unable to rule yourself, which I think that's the point that Luce is making, is that Bree is free now, but he's unable to govern himself better than the harsh master that he had.
Or maybe
whereas Shasta, it's the opposite, yeah.
And maybe we can think optimistically that he really has the ability, but he has not tapped into it yet. He's not.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's in danger of letting his slavery go to waste. Don't waste your slavery.
Yeah.
There. That's
Yes.
the
Yeah.
John Piper
That
salute there.
that would be a great if there's ever a second run of your book for publishing, if they retitled it, Athanasius didn't ask me, but that would have been a great title for for the book.
We only had about 10 titles that we all liked or that I liked, and we ended up giving it the one I never suggested, but that's okay. By the way, while we're talking about this, I mean, I can't help what you just said about being a slave and not being able to handle freedom. It sounds, I mean, wasn't that the Exodus? Wasn't that the whole point of the wilderness? Wasn't that the whole problem? I mean, they obviously they grew mighty under slavery. Obviously, they were a threat to Pharaoh. Yet at the same time, in various ways, they were not a threat to anyone. They were very not impotent, or at least they made the nocebo effect, right? They made themselves impotent by what they were worried about and what they were concerned about and what they wanted as kind of a precondition to acting. They wanted the food provided for them. Anyway, so that's interesting. I think. So
yeah, absolutely.
So the other thing, of course, is that we're talking about Shasta, who was kind of nominally a son, but was actually a slave, and was going to be sold. Like I said, it was going to be revealed by the selling if it had happened by this transaction. But then there's the noble lady or princess or whatever. What's the type? I mean, Tarkina is the term they use in Calendar. It's the Aravis. Now she's an aristocrat, but that doesn't make you free. I mean, she's got strictures, and some of them are absolutely, she believes, unlivable. Namely, she's got to marry some decrepit psychopath. So,
yes,
so she has all these constraints, and she wants to escape slavery just as much as Shasta, even though her status in the society is like light years above him.
And it's night and day, their status. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the other thing is that this is one of the tricky things about slavery is that, slavery is just a word, because Bree and Aravis and Hwin all have a society in common with each other, and leave Shasta out, because even though Bree has to pretend to be a dumb animal and is a slave, he in fact hangs out with all the royal army and royal people and knows all the men of the family, because they've all been in the military. And he's been among them as like a prize war horse among other prize war horses. So it's funny how and it's true. I mean, in the ancient world, there are some systems of slavery where you would be at an advantage to become a slave. It'd be like you'd literally being promoted, be moving on up. Now, that obviously,
if you were, in ancient Rome, for example, if you were the steward of a patrician's house, you would have a much higher position in society than you would as a free plebeian in Rome.
Right. And I mean, while we could say that was relatively rare, so was being a prosperous single freeman too. That was rare too. I mean, most of
absolutely.
You're basically drudge labor. I mean, so it's just
absolutely
the economics of it are kind of more determinative in some ways.
Well, and it's a point that with Aravis, that I don't know if you're going this direction, but I do remember a long time ago, years ago, maybe 8-9 years ago, reading this great blog post that someone wrote about CEOs and how everyone is envious of CEOs. I think it was after actually, the financial crisis, the last financial crisis and the bailouts, and all of these CEOs getting massive bonuses, and it looked really bad, and there was all sorts of financial scams and things like that taking place. But I remember someone wrote this great blog post about how CEOs actually are the world's most wealthy and powerful slaves. And do you remember writing that?
I didn't read that. I was writing it. No.
It was from your blog.
What? I wrote that?
Yes.
Old age, guys, fear it.
Yeah.
I remember thinking of CEOs as basically talismans. Because I feel like companies the reason why they paid CEOs simply because, and I've thought about this in a long time, so I may not agree with this anymore, but
Yeah.
I thought one of the reasons for massive CEO pay was basically on the superstition that some CEO could do miracles for the company. And I mean, what are you going to do? Take a big, huge, multi-billion company and then pay the CEO like a pittance of that? I mean, it just doesn't compute. They have to make
Yeah.
the position ornamental. I mean, I don't know. This may all
Well,
be
but
garbage,
at some level, the
but they
general
are.
takeaway post that I think you probably still agree with is that um, people that are in positions of high authority, and this is kind of our friend Rich Bledsoe makes this point a lot too. Um, People that are in very high positions of authority have massive responsibilities. They aren't free in the sense that we think
Yes.
they are. They can't just do whatever they want. They
Yeah.
have the weight of the world in many senses on their shoulders, and so
Right.
in many ways
Yes.
they are more constricted than somebody like us, basically that are not running companies or countries or
That's right.
large institutions, things like that.
Well, they certainly
And
have
so I
less
think
freedom of speech.
yeah, oh,
They
absolutely, yeah,
absolutely, and another thing I've always wondered about this when we talk about like these guys who are so liberal, and we think of them as influences. And sometimes I think, are they, or are they
mm,
basically only those people are going to get that position? I mean,
mm,
who really makes those?
yeah,
Who? I mean, they're there to represent the consensus, but do they invent it? I think I wonder the same thing, by the way, since you brought this up about celebrities.
yes.
I mean, if a powerful celebrity becomes either Christian or conservative, it would mean that they would just fade from view. It wouldn't mean that they would suddenly become. I mean, with the
Or
exception.
even even one that isn't. I mean, you could give an example. Even one that is not at all conservative or Christian was Dave Chappelle. He was a guy who was I don't know how familiar you are with him,
Yeah.
but he was a guy when I was in high school and early in college was at the peak of celebrity. I mean, he had the most popular comedy show on TV, and uh, just completely gave it all up because he was tired of being controlled. I think he went to Africa and converted to Islam, and
Oh,
basically went out of the public eye for like a decade, and only recently has come back.
I didn't know that
And,
was his
and after he
background.
come, yeah, after he came back, he started saying like nice things about Donald Trump, and a lot of people in his orbit very angry. And so I think a lot of it was he wants to be able to say whatever he wants and be free. But you see that he rejected that programming that you have to be able to have that kind of platform.
Yeah.
And I think it illustrates your point that these people are not free. They're given this platform. They influence a lot of people, but because they're allowed to.
Yeah.
They're not free people. Yeah, in really any meaningful sense.
I don't think so. Anyway, so this daughter of the culture is also finding herself hemmed in awful ways. Um, so yeah, we could go with that a lot. I'll stop there.
Yeah,
But
we
I
could spend
mean,
a couple hours.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting though. Now, one thing I don't necessarily agree with this, but I thought it was interesting that it seems that Lewis kind of has a preference for tomboys because I
Hmm.
realized Erebus is in her brother's armor, and
Hmm.
when it he meets her friend. I mean, when she meets her friend in Tashband, who helps her escape when they get separated, because Shasta and Erebus got separated. Um, Lazareline is her name. She insisted on Erebus having a long and luxurious bath. Calormene's baths are famous, and then dressing her up in the finest clothes before she would let her explain anything. The fuss she made about choosing the dresses nearly drove Erebus mad. She remembered now that Lazareline had always been like that, interested in clothes and parties and gossip. Erebus had always been more interested in bows and arrows and horses and dogs and swimming. You'll guess that each thought the other silly. Now that last sentence I thought was Lewis trying to be neutral in the issue, but he doesn't seem that neutral. He just seems to. Anyway, I'm not sure that's a good thing, but that seems to be related to Aravis's striking out on her own. In any case, so I don't make any lesson from that. I just observe it seems to be in Lewis's mind. I don't want to say anything stupid now because I'm not free to say anything I want. No, just kidding. I don't even know what to say about that. I just thought it was interesting to see that. So, by the way, that thing about it's interesting though. One of the things that comes out in the end is that even though Bree's been treated wrongly as a slave, to be a free horse, it's really important for him to learn humility, because he's also learned to think a great deal about himself, because he's comparing himself to brutes, to real animals, literally animals. So there's a whole little, and I won't read it, but there's a whole discourse about how of course you thought you were great then, but now that you've disappointed yourself, that just means you've lost your self-conceit. And if you realize you're nothing special, you actually be better off for it. So I thought it was a good lesson there.
Well, I think it's one of those things too, where when you're a young man, especially in the generation I grew up in, like it was the self-esteem era, and everyone is told, when we were in elementary school, every single one of you is going to grow up to be president of the United States, and you're all going to be NFL superstars, and you're going to be every one of you is going to be awesome. And that's not true. I mean, some people internalize that and think that they are special when they're not, and each person learns that they're not special, that they're mundane, they're normal people at different times in life. And the earlier you learn that, oftentimes the better off you are, because then you're free to be the best normal person that you can be.
Well, that's interesting, because that actually, that's why I brought up this and I put the quote in, and then I kind of forgot half of that when I started alluding to it. But that's actually right. That's why I thought it was really important. Saying, what does the hermit say to the horse? He says, "You're not quite the great horse you'd come to think from living among poor dumb horses." And he says, "But as long as you know you're nobody very special, you'll be a very decent sort of horse on the whole, taking one thing with another." And I thought about that because he's implying that Bree should be happy to be that. And I think a lot of people, when they discover they're mundane, that puts them in the loser category right there.
Yeah, that's when the midlife crisis starts.
So instead of it being a freeing thing, which it really should be, and also being a starting point for real progress in your life, well, you don't care. It doesn't matter. You don't need to make progress. You're just mundane. So you have this kind of vicious, like, false dilemma, where you've got to be great and famous and wonderful and skilled. And if you're not, nothing matters, and no one has a right to try to expect anything of you. I mean, and you shouldn't expect anything of yourself. And it's just
you swing to the opposite extreme.
It's just ridiculous. Yeah. Because if you think about it, obviously, not everyone can take up an infinite amount of space. I mean, there's room for everybody to do their thing and to live their lives, but they're not all going to be gargantuan. They're not all going to be on Zoom. I was just kidding. Anyway, and so they've got to, if you can't find a way to be happy, then you really are setting yourself. It's like saying you can't, there's no way to get wealthy except to win the lottery. I mean, it's just, and there's no point in trying to do anything to improve your life incrementally, because the lottery is the only thing that really will make you happy. And that just doesn't happen. So.
Well, man, that's just it. I mean, everyone want, the second, I mean, I really relate it to like sports, for example. Like the sooner you discover that you're not going to be Tom Brady, you can go the direction where then you just quit the football team altogether. because, well, I'm not going to be Tom Brady, I'm going to give up. But you might, if you work hard, you might be good enough to get to go to college for free.
Yeah.
If you're one of the best in the area, because you worked so hard, like things like that. So it can be freeing to have an accurate evaluation of yourself and your skills and your weaknesses. But when you've overestimated it so far, and then you come crashing down to reality, it can make you fatalistic too, like you're
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so like the sooner, if you just let yourself just go, way beyond, because it goes exponentially almost. If you have this overestimation of yourself, when here's the reality, and the longer time goes on, the longer you think that you're this superstar, with the 200 IQ or or whatever, and then you come down to reality later in life, then you're going to be crushed.
Yeah.
But if you are, even in younger age, if you grow up and realize you're just a normal person, but God has given you gifts for you to hone and to get better at, that are going to serve you well. And the sooner you realize that, the better off you are, and the better your
Absolutely.
life is. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of Shas's advantages, even though he longed for things to happen that would be good to him, his baseline it was actually more grounded than Breeze. I mean, his baseline was, he seemed very, like, he didn't assume that if he went to war, he'd be like great in battle. He actually realized he'd probably get killed and tried
Yeah,
not to do
he's
it.
not going to be any good. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Went into it anyway with this idea. What was it he said to himself? I didn't do that quote. I like this. He said, Shasta was dreadfully frightened, but it suddenly came into his head. This is as he's going to battle. The word is funk, F-U-N-K. I just want to make that clear in print. If you funk this, you'll funk every battle all your life, now or never. And he didn't do very well, but he went into it bravely. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't confused with what I said there. Okay.
Yeah, when I
So
heard that on the audiobook, I had to pause.
F-U-N-K. I don't know what was going on with Lewis when he wrote the book, if there's possible, never mind. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, and then finally, bad things.
Well, let me back up to
Yeah,
that point you're
yeah,
making there, because I mean, it illustrates another point of wisdom that syncs up really well with Proverbs, like you bring up, that any, I mean, it's a million self-help kind of things, where it's like a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a first step, or anything worth doing is worth doing badly at first. All of these things. If you don't go fight this battle now, if you screw up, not because you're bad at it, but because you retreat in cowardice, you're going to do that for the rest of your life, right? If you
yeah,
give up now, if you make a habit of
right.
cowardice now, that starts now in the present, you're going to continue that on. So you have to make the choice now for the future to go into battle and be bad at it, because you're going to get better. But the virtue of courage is what's going to be built up
Yeah,
in that. I think that point, even though it's funnily worded, especially in our context now, is really important. Uh,
I will say offhand, as you mentioned it, that in general, writing the book and thinking about Proverbs has actually made me appreciate a bunch of these cliches a lot more than I used to,
yeah,
about your only competition is with yourself, your former self. Your only comparison is with your former self. I mean, I'd give somebody a little bit of an out there and say, if they do screw up 5 times, it's going to be harder to break a habit of cowardice, but it's still a habit that can be broken, and you got to take it seriously and do that. So that becomes your next act of courage, if you will. But you're right. I mean, better to do it young before you have too many bad habits. In any case,
well, yeah, all sorts of things like that,
yeah,
or even like
absolutely.
even ones that, the Gretzky one of, the you miss all the shots you don't take, or that it's better to make a decision wrongly than make no decision, or things like that. Which, I
Absolutely.
mean, there's wisdom in those things, that you can overcome a bad decision better than you can overcome
Put on
indecision.
put on your own
Things like that.
airbag first before you put on someone else's, which I think is a really good piece of
Yeah,
advice if applied rightly. That you worry about your own
yeah,
problems before you try to solve someone else's. Don't be a savior. Don't think of
yeah.
yourself that
So
way.
many of those. So
Yeah.
many of those. Yeah.
So anyway, okay. So I was trying to think if we've covered everything I wanted to say. I mean, he says, no, just general thing. It shows providence, bad things happening to make us better. The
Hmm.
lion chasing the horses to make them run faster. Erebus getting 10 scratches to learn what it felt like. I mean, there's stuff like that. There's one thing he said. I've got this quote, and I remember reading it, but I can't remember where it was in the book. And this was kind of Lewis's throw off wisdom. It wasn't necessarily to the story, but when things go wrong, you'll find they usually go on getting worse for some time. But when things once start going right, they often go on getting better and better. Now, I wish I could remembered where I read that in the book.
I remember that too. Yeah, I remember hearing that.
It
Yeah,
was a
yeah.
weird, to me, that struck me as weird. I think the point was that you have to be patient, that things will flip around, and you got to just trust you'll
Hmm.
gain ground back if you're going through that. The other one was, when the horses run to the hermit, but they haven't gotten to King Loon yet, so the horses are going to die. So Shasta's got to run. So Shasta's told this, and he says, Shasta's heart fainted at these words, for he felt he had no strength left, and he writhed inside at what seemed the cruelty and unfairness of the demand. He had not yet learned that if you do one good deed, your reward usually is to be set to do another and harder and better one.
Hmm.
And the first thing I thought of is no good deed goes unpunished, but that's actually a different kind of cynical statement. That's not it. I started thinking about what God says, if you've been faithful in small things, I'll put you
Yeah,
over larger things. Well,
that's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah,
that's not necessarily a
yeah,
reward. That's not necessarily going to
yeah,
be perceived right away as this great thing. It's not like saying you get a vacation.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
not like saying
Exactly.
it's saying you get a boatload of new responsibility and we needed this job filled yesterday, so catch up.
Yeah,
That's
it's saying that, okay, you've done a great job at being the janitor, and now you're the CEO and you're running
yeah,
everything. And it's not, oh yeah, oh great, you're making 8 figures now, or whatever. But everything is riding on you. Every
yeah,
decision, the buck stops with you, and so yeah, it's exactly right. But that's what maturity is. That's what um, that's what God gives us when you're faithful in one small thing. It's both those things together. Um, both the original point of um, that that when stuff starts to happen right, things start to line up after a lot of bad stuff, and things start going well, then it just compounds, and it seems like now you've made it over a hill, because everyone has been through, most everyone has been through really difficult seasons of life, where it seems like things are never going to be good. Everything's always going to be bad. um you know and it just takes one. I relate it to baseball, actually. When you sometimes, if you're when you're playing baseball and you're out in the field, especially if you're the pitcher, and you can be in this situation where you're throwing pitches, and every hitter, it just seems like they've got your number, and they they're every single one of you, they're either hitting the ball or they're getting on base somehow. You can't get anybody out, and they've just scored 5 runs. They're about to, they're going to bat around in this inning, and you've still got 0 outs. But then once you get that first out, then all of a sudden the inning is over in a few moments. But it takes getting that first out, right? You got to get that first out, and then things compound once something good happens. And you see it all the time in so many other contexts, whether it's in work, in business, in sales. You make that first sale, now you're going to get more. um, so many things like that, and that's what God does in our life. Just like the Exodus, you have to be taken through the Exodus. That old generation has to be burned away basically and purged, and then you take that first city, and then you take the next one and the next one, and so that's what God does in maturing us. Is He takes you through the wilderness and then slowly gives you more and more stuff to succeed at.
And we need to say that I would want to add that you don't know the God's timetable with this. I mean, I'm sure Joseph felt, Joseph felt he'd learned his lesson, or should have, when he was in Potiphar's house, he thought he'd arrived in some sense, and then, you got to be willing to be knocked back a few times and keep trusting God.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I really thank you for spending all this time with me. I really appreciate it, Andrew. This ended up being a lot longer. I hope people find this interesting. And I hope they read the book. And I mean, not my book.
Both
I'd like
books.
them to read both books. Yeah.
No, they need to read
them
both
together.
books.
Read them together. That's what
Yes,
I'm saying.
yes,
That's
absolutely.
what I'm saying. I'll explain what C.S. Lewis really meant to say. No, just kidding. Anyway.
No, I'll shill for you, Mark. You read Mark's book too.
Oh, I don't have to do that. Hey, thank you. Well, God bless Andrew. I will see you later, and thanks for doing this with me. Appreciate your words.
My pleasure, Mark. Thanks.
Thanks. All right.